Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name's Ivana if you're new here. If you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is Thursday. I almost said Wednesday. Today is Thursday, June the 24th. And today we're going to talk about something that I know has got a lot of people kind of fired up, especially on social media this week. And that is a story that we published earlier in the week, written by our own Amy Yurkanin, who joins me today, about how one North Alabama woman is being charged with a felony after refilling a prescription that was written to her. So, Amy, I know this got a lot of people really fired up of saying, look, you're refilling your own prescription. Why is it illegal to refill your own prescription? So thank you for coming here today to sit down and kind of explain this and talk about the nuances and these kind of small loopholes that it seems this woman is being charged under.
Hey, thanks, Ivana. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, this is a really interesting case. It came across my radar a little while ago. And as soon as I saw it, I started kind of looking into it because I knew that this would be an issue that would a lot of people might be interested in. And the case is about a woman named Kim Blaylock who lives in Florence, Alabama, and she is a mother of 6. And Kim has had diagnosed chronic back conditions for 4 years. She suffers from degenerative disc disease and arthritis. In addition to that, I guess like a bit more than a year ago, maybe about a year and a half ago, she was in a car accident and she had some surgical complications that really compounded the back problems that she already had. So Kim had been using hydrocodone for her chronic back pain. And hydrocodone is basically one of the most commonly prescribed drugs for chronic pain. It is, it is an prescribed opioid, less strong than OxyContin, but still, has opioids in it mixed with Tylenol, I believe. So this is just, I think, it's a very common drug. I think most people have had a prescription for it. And this is what she was
And Amy,
using.
I'm sorry. I was going to stop really quick. We got a bunch of people who just joined on. I know sometimes it takes a few minutes for our alerts to get out to people. So I just wanted to stop you. I'm sorry, Amy, and give people who are just joining a quick look at what we're talking about. And that is a story of how one woman refilled her prescription that was written to her. It was a legal prescription and is being charged with a felony. Now, there's a lot of nuances to the stories. There's a lot of legal kind of jargon to the story that we're going to get into in a minute. But right now we are talking about Kim Blaylock and her story. 36-year-old woman in Florence, Alabama was dealing with some chronic back pain and was being, as Amy was just mentioning, she was prescribed and was taking hydrocodone. Amy, sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no worries. So Kim did become pregnant with her 6th child, and she went back late in her pregnancy. She had stopped taking the pain pills for the first, 2.5 trimesters, basically. And then in the very last 6 weeks of her pregnancy, she refilled her pain prescription just because the back pain became overwhelming to her. And when she did this, 6 weeks later, she gave birth to her child, and her child tested positive for opioids at birth. And that is when the police got involved. Often cases like this are charged under chemical endangerment. When a baby tests positive for sort of a controlled substance, that's the law that's used. This case was not charged as chemical endangerment because in 2016, the legislature basically added something to the law that said it couldn't be used against people with lawful prescriptions. Kim had a lawful prescription, so the chemical endangerment law did not apply to her. So instead
and let's get into, we're going to get into law in a minute, but she had her baby tests positive for opioids. What happens in the hospital as Kim is sitting there and her baby's undergoing this testing? And her baby, we should note, is healthy and it's fine at this point.
Yeah, the baby was healthy. She said that she informed her obstetrician about the hydrocodone and didn't seem to be a big deal at the time. The baby was never separated from her. The baby suffered from jaundice for about 4 days, a very common condition, completely unrelated to opioid use. A lot of babies have it until a mom's breast milk comes in, and they start gaining weight. So her baby had that and required a little bit of extra attention in the hospital for about 4 days. And then they were discharged. Baby was healthy. DHR got involved because of the opioid test. But Kim was able to show them her prescription, show them the bottle of pills, let them count the pills. And according to Kim and her attorneys, they closed the case at that point.
So DHR had stepped in when like you said, when that test came back, DHR stepped in, said, what's the deal? What's happening? They look at the prescription, they count the pills in the bottle, and DHR, and I am looking at I'm not sure the county here. This is Florence Police, Lauderdale County. DHR, they said, look, we get it. It's, you're okay. This is not a crime under the chemical endangerment law. You were prescribed this medication. You were taking it. We're stepping away.
Exactly. And it should be noted that DHR is not a criminal agency. So they weren't, looking for necessarily a crime, but they were, looking to make sure that there wasn't a substance abuse issue that would endanger the child. And basically their determination was that there wasn't one, that she was taking the pills as prescribed and, not impaired. So they stepped away. And at that point, Kim was being investigated by the Florence Police Department, according to her attorneys. And her attorneys, basically got involved and told the Florence Police Department, you can't charge her under chemical endangerment. This was a lawful prescription. And they did not charge her with that. Instead, she was charged with prescription fraud. And this may be the first time that the law has been used in this way. I can't say that for sure, but it's the first case that I'm aware of. It's the first case that her attorneys are aware of, and they represent women across the country who have been charged with crimes related to pregnancy. So.
Well, and so this is what I think it kind of gets us maybe more into this legal nuance. And we're going to break it down so that it is not as, so that we're not just using the legal jargon here. This is something important. You said she was not charged with the chemical endangerment law. Now, anybody, especially those people who maybe followed us in 2016, when we at AL.com did reporting along with ProPublica about chemical endangerment law, about mothers who were taking opioids or other types of strong drugs and then had babies that were born and tested positive for opioids. That law was written to protect babies from, and babies, when I say babies, I mean children, I mean pregnant women, etc., from fumes in meth labs. That was what that law was written for.
So yes, the law was written, and it actually did not apply to pregnant women at all when it was written. It was entirely written the intent was to protect children against exposure to meth lab fumes. It wasn't only meth labs, but that was generally what inspired the law. Is basically there were cases of home-based meth labs. Kids were in the next room. Sometimes they were venting the fumes, through an area with children, and that became a huge concern. So that is where the law came from, and it basically prohibits the exposure of a child to, the manufacture or distribution of drugs. So that was what it was written. That was the intent of the law. Very soon after the law was enacted, a prosecutor in Alabama basically decided that the womb is an environment, a fetus is a child, so you could also interpret the law to apply to a woman who uses drugs during pregnancy. That was not the intent when it was written, but that was how it was interpreted, and the Alabama Supreme Court upheld that interpretation. And that's kind of how this law has become known in Alabama, that chemical endangerment law. While it maybe wasn't written to apply to pregnant women and to fetuses, that is the way that it started getting a little bit more popularity and notoriety, I guess, depending on what side of the issue you're on. That is how it was being charged more, was pregnant women. That's how we saw it being charged a lot, Amy, pregnant women who were taking these drugs. Now, fast forward a little bit, and we know that state leaders said, we don't want this to apply to people with legal prescriptions. That is not the intent here. Correct. So part of that ProPublica story involved a woman named Hannah Ballinger who had been prescribed methadone for chronic pain, perfectly legal prescription, and she was convicted under this law. And after that story came out, there were definite concerns about how this could impact, because since it wasn't written to apply to pregnant women, there was nothing in the law about how legal prescriptions should be treated. And some prosecutors were treating a legally prescribed prescribed opioid really in the same way that they would treat heroin. So, there was a sense that this was not a good thing, and could really impair sort of how doctors medically treat women. And just the fact of sort of the state getting involved in that process at all became a big concern. So they exempted legally prescribed drugs, and they said this law cannot be used against a woman who has taken a legally prescribed drug during pregnancy.
So that's kind of that background, that chemical endangerment law. So we've got people saying that law needs to be revised, et cetera. And that's a conversation that needs to happen. But that's actually not the law that Kim Blaylock was charged under with this felony crime. She was actually charged, and you go into this in your story, with prescription fraud. Now, we're going to get into this in a minute, but she was not charged with chemical endangerment because, as you said, the law was revised to exclude women with legal prescriptions. Kim Blaylock had a legal prescription for hydrocodone. Now, I got my phone in front of me. I have the Code of Alabama in front of me, and I've looked up the code for prescription fraud. And this is what it says. It says a person commits the crime of essentially prescription fraud, saying, except as otherwise authorized, he or she possesses this controlled substance, or he or she obtains by fraud, deceit, misrepresentation, alteration of a prescription or written order by the concealment of a material fact. And then it goes into changing if you use a false name, a false address, et cetera. That's typically where we see prescription fraud come in, is this part of the code that talks about this false name, this false address, or people having things that their name and their birth date, et cetera, do not match up to. That's typically how we see prescription fraud. Amy, tell us how prescription fraud is applied in this case.
Yeah. So, as you mentioned, typically a prescription fraud case might be, you forge a prescription or you change a prescription or you use a false name, as you mentioned. There's also something called doctor shopping, which is where, a patient goes to several doctors for the same ailment, maybe back pain, and gets several prescriptions and a lot more potentially controlled substances than they would have gotten if they had just gone to one doctor. So that is sort of a typical prescription fraud case. Now, in the Kim Blaylock case, the allegation is that she committed fraud by not telling her orthopedist that she was pregnant at the time that she refilled her prescription. Kim said that she was not asked and didn't think to tell them that she was pregnant. And so this is, as far as I know, the first time that it's been charged this way in Alabama. I don't know that for sure. I haven't gone through every case, but I have not seen this before. And this is what really sort of makes this, I think, an interesting case, is that the charge here is prescription fraud. The legal theory here is that basically Kim Blaylock had a legal obligation to tell her doctor that she was pregnant when she refilled this prescription. And by not telling him, even though she wasn't asked, that she broke the law and committed fraud. And that's just, I think, opens the door to potentially, all pregnant women being in a situation where they could potentially be breaking the law if they don't disclose this information, in a medical appointment. And that's, I think, a really, I don't know, it's a burden potentially on pregnant women, a legal burden for them to disclose information, whether or not a doctor ever asks, whatever the situation is, and that they could potentially face a felony if they don't.
Well, and I'm glad you said that. It's kind of one of the nuts of the story, right? Is saying, is it prescription fraud to not tell your doctor you're pregnant?
Yeah, that's really it.
And that's something that is very, very interesting. And it's kind of one of those sentences that you never really expect to say, and you don't really know how to answer. But that's kind of what this is. Now, something that I think is fascinating here, and we were talking about it a little bit before we went live. Somebody, by the way, asked, Brandy said, who was the doctor here? Now, we should note that the doctor did not respond to requests for comment for this story. I know, Amy, that you tried to reach out to that doctor. So this is what I think is so interesting. We know, I'm going to back up a little. We know that Miss Blaylock, Kim Blaylock, had been taking this medicine for about 4 years. When she first, I'm assuming first just realized she was pregnant in early 2020, she stopped taking her medicine. Fast forward to pretty late in her third trimester, unbearable pain. She says she refills that prescription. Now, we know at some point in there, she went to her doctor, got that refill. Couple points here, Amy, and I'll let you go into this a little bit more, but she was not, because of the pandemic, as most of us know, life has been changed in so many ways, and appointments have been changed. So one of these appointments that she went to, this doctor, she did not actually go in the building. It was kind of a car visit. And I think a lot of us probably had the exact same experience during the pandemic, right? But what I think is very interesting is at that time, prosecutors allege she did not tell either the doctor or the nurse, whoever came out to her car for that visit, that she was pregnant. But at the same time, she alleges, Kim Blaylock alleges, well, they didn't ask me. And at the same time, you have to think, I've never been pregnant, but you have to think that somebody in their third trimester, if you are a medical professional and you are seeing them for some sort of doctor's visit, that you would notice that they were pregnant.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I wasn't there. This wasn't a typical in-office visit. It was a pandemic visit. And my understanding is that Kim remained in her car and the provider was at the window. As we mentioned, things were different. And I think it's possible that the provider didn't see or really wasn't looking and could have missed that she was pregnant. I mean, I do know who the doctor is. I did try to reach him. I don't really know, his involvement in this case at all. So I think I'm, probably going to just, talk about the issues that we know instead of sort of naming who that person is. But yeah, I mean, I really don't know what happened, whether they knew she was pregnant by looking at her or didn't. It's possible it just fell through the cracks. I mean, there's a lot of concern here. I mean, the issue of taking hydrocodone during pregnancy is a controversial one. Opioids can cause neonatal abstinence syndrome among babies who are born to women who use them during pregnancy. I think there's been a lot of concern about this condition, but there's not maybe a lot of understanding of it. It is, babies have withdrawal type symptoms. They experience, there's a lot of crying, poor feeding, and sometimes tremors. And it's, I think, a very difficult thing to watch. But what's notable about this is that it is a treatable condition. Babies, typically spend several weeks in the NICU, being weaned, off on different types of drugs. They can be comforted. There's a lot of good advice about basically keeping infants with mothers to provide, better care. And basically this is a transitory condition. The babies get better. And there's really no indication right now of long-term consequences of this. So when you are weighing treatment for a mom, there are concerns about, is it worse to, not treat pain in a mother or to risk potentially a baby having this condition. It is notable that Kim Blaylock's baby did not have that diagnosis, never diagnosed with neonatal abstinence syndrome. But yeah, it's not necessarily a guarantee that she would not have been prescribed these drugs if she had been pregnant. There are risks to the baby, but there are also risks of not continuing prescriptions for moms who are on them. I mean, you really have to weigh it. It's a medical decision. It isn't, kind of a legal one necessarily, her lawyers are arguing. This is something where a doctor and a patient really have to think through, all the potential consequences together. And whether the state should be getting involved in that is really one of the questions here.
Well, and again, like you said, we'll note again, Kim Blaylock's, I believe now 8-month-old baby is healthy, happy. I believe she said starting to crawl. So good news there out of that story. And again, we should note Lauderdale County District Attorney Chris Conley did comment for the story. You can read his comments in full in Amy's piece that we've linked here in the comments. But to give you the nutshell, he says that his office is not trying to get around that chemical endangerment law. He says that this is prescription fraud, and he believes it's prescription fraud because she, meaning Kim Blaylock, had the responsibility to inform her doctors and her medical team that she was pregnant. So that is his stance on this. Again, you can read his comments in full in Amy's story. Now, I could probably sit here and talk about this all day, Amy. I know that you could too. Unfortunately, we don't have that option, but I'm interested in everybody. If you're watching, give me your comments. Is it prescription fraud to not tell a doctor that you're pregnant? Let us know in the comments what you think. And Amy, I know that you're going to be following this story. Again, we're linking your reporting here for people to follow, but we appreciate you just coming and trying to make sense of the situation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ivana, and thank you to everyone who's watching.
Thank you so much, everybody. And I will not see you tomorrow, actually, but I will see you on Monday. Have a great weekend.
Bye.